Good evening, Professor Chatterjee. I was thinking this afternoon what a beautiful thing it could be when there is a conversation and there is a talk about mysterious things. More importantly, these people behind the mysterious things in these novels are very much lauded for what they're doing. So, Agatha Christie, we think of her as a huge name. How have you been, and what mystery do you unfold about Agatha Christie?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Magan. You and I have been uh, privy to a lot of newspaper articles of late that have been reporting on an incident that occurred in India more than 110 years ago. And, I am here to tell you that a lot of the information that we are uh, reading in these reports regarding a murder plot that unfolded in a township called Mussoorie around 1911, 1912. A lot of the information is actually, for lack of a better phrase, it's woke or artificial intelligence generated fake news. So we will need to clear a lot of ground and clear out a lot of things for our viewers.
This is going back in time, and India is on the spotlight. We think of India as very wonderful, as a milieu. Mussoorie sounds interesting a name. What do we think about Mussoorie in this plot that we're talking about?
Well, I think it's up to you to tell me what does that name remind you of? Mussoorie, which is an Indian township, it's a hill station. It was founded by the British around 1820s, and it has a sister township called Landour. But before I proceed, does that name ring any bells for you?
Mussoorie, a U.S. state. That's the only thing I can think of. Very Western, right? So as you said, the West went to India. Perhaps that's the reason why.
Well, it could have been that. There's a pulse grown in India, which is exceedingly famous, and it's now famous all over the world. It's called Masoor. It's a dal. Mussoorie apparently got its name from that pulse, Masoor, because that pulse is grown in its vicinity. But it could also be something borrowed from a place in the United States. You never know, because Mussourie's sister township, as I said, Landour, it's been quite informedly speculated that Landour borrows its name from a Welsh county village called Landour, which is in Carmarthenshire or Carmarthenshire in Wales. And so it's not entirely unlikely that Mussoorie may have had some kind of derivation from Missouri. But that's not really the real mystery that we are going to unravel for our viewers today. It's something far more sinister, and as you mentioned, it's about Agatha Christie and a murder plot. So, Dr. Magan, I think you are already aware, but our viewers need to be that it is very likely, as evidence suggests, that Agatha Christie might just have got the germ of an idea for her first novel from a murder mystery, a real life murder mystery that unfolded in Mussoorie around 1911, 1912. And that apparently, it has been speculated that apparently, led to the intellectual fodder for her first novel, Mysterious Affair at Styles, that was published in 1920. Now, does this at all sound reasonable to you? Is there any way in which murder mystery from India could have fed the intellectual cells of Agatha Christie?
All I know is that for big writers like Agatha Christie, there should be a big inspiration. Otherwise, she shouldn't be writing, right? So perhaps this incident in India in the 20th century, early 20th century, is something that really was the germ of her very famous novel.
At the heart of this mystery actually is a hotel in Mussoorie, and that's known as the Savoy Hotel. Now, in Bilateral View, we are naming the hotel quite informedly, quite consciously, because we believe that whatever we are going to say about this hotel today is in no way going to be libelous. So we are taking full responsibility, and we have done plenty of research, and we can assure you that we are armed with far more evidence than any of the reports that viewers may stumble upon in relation to Hotel Savoy. So it is believed even today that Hotel Savoy is haunted. And we are going to debunk that mythology. Although I think it's important here to share that there are hotels all across the world which almost bribe their residents to spread the rumor that such and such hotel is haunted, because there's a very profitable aspect of tourism known as thanatourism or dark tourism. That is, it's related to necromanticism. It began, or it at least became very popular during the Romantic times in early 19th century England, when hotels and buildings and houses, old establishments were labeled as carrying history. So we spoke about the voices of the past, the apparitions of the past, when we were discussing Satyajit Ray and haunted Indian railways. So, like the first class compartment, which was haunted in a mock way, in not a very real way, I think the Hotel Savoy in Mussoorie, which was built in the very, very early 20th century, is also haunted, but not in a very real way. So there are no actual ghosts in Mussoorie. And you and I, are going to explain to our viewers what are the real reasons that we consider it not to be haunted, before I proceed with the story, which concerns A, the township of Mussoorie, which was a hill station established in the 1920s in India, B, the Hotel Savoy, and C, Dame Agatha Christie's first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. So we are going to join the dots of what connects the three. But before that, do you have any final questions?
Hearing those things, I thought that you have just given us a very picturesque view of Mussoorie. There's the train station and the hotel. These are very important points when you are going to expect a very good story to unfold. So Mussoorie being associated with dark tourism, again, that's another interesting thing in this layered conversation we're having tonight. And moving on to Agatha Christie's world, we could only assume that she really took time to, piece all the dots together, or connect all the dots together, and ensure that the world will really never forget about what happened in Hotel Savoy, as you said earlier, a very mysterious hotel. And another layer to this is a question I'm going to give towards this introduction to Agatha Christie. What kind of resonance are we seeing from these people living in Mussoorie, and knowing that they are very much aware of the history of Hotel Savoy in their locality, and how do they move on with it?
Yeah. So before we launch into the main story, I think this question or similar questions are very, very relevant. So thank you for that, because if I have to be the storyteller for today, there might be details which or background details at least, which you might have to sort of elbow me to share with our viewers. So on the question of background and what the residents of Mussoorie think. So Mussoorie, even today, as it was especially in the 19th century, Mussoorie is a gossip-friendly town, and it is in some ways the microcosm of India, but in some other ways, it's actually not like India at all, because Mussoorie was established with the sole purpose of transplanting and regrowing little bits of England into India. Naturally, when the colonials felt homesick, they created hill stations. And the thing about hill stations is that this was a phenomenon that the British used in the 19th century to sort of scale down the gigantic magnitude of the Himalayas, arguably the biggest mountain range in the world. It had to be established in British consciousness that India and its hill stations were not actually very far off places. So India had to be established as an amazing beauty. Well, India is definitely extremely beautiful, but the British, for them to acclimatize themselves to Indian conditions, tropical conditions, and the impenetrable forests, the vast, complex terrains and cultures of India. So the hill stations were like an aesthetic, cultural, and even political distraction for the British. Mussoorie, established in 1820s, thanks to the transplantation of potatoes. So one captain in the British Army Irish captain, I must add, he wanted to grow potatoes, and he found a spot near Landour, which I've already described. And that's how Mussoorie came into being. Mussoorie has actually the distinction of being an earlier hill station than its senior rival, Simla, which gained in popularity during the latter part of the 19th century. Prior to Simla's establishment in the 1840s, Mussoorie was the main hotspot for the British. But Afterwards, Simla became the summer capital, and therefore Simla got the big Gothic buildings and so on. So Victorian Gothic architecture, Swiss Alpine Gothic architecture has its grounding in Simla and in other metro cities, whereas Mussoorie was always on the smaller side of architecture and material things. But what reigned supreme in Mussoorie were its ghost stories. So a lot of and the gossip and the idling and the lounging. So John Lang writes in Wanderings in the Himalayas in 1858. John Lang was an Anglo Australian Indian barrister who interestingly fought the case of a doctrine of lapse in favor of the Rani of Jhansi against the British government. So he was like a rebel lawyer. He writes very interestingly in Wanderings in Himalayas about Mussoorie that all of us here are either sick or have leave to be sick. So we are idlers, we are loungers, and this gossip element of Mussoorie stuck to it and has never been disentangled since the 19th century. So people in that township do like a good story, whether or not it is true, especially if it is not true. Uh, now, to come back to the Savoy Hotel. The Savoy was built in 1902 and it has a writer's bar which has been made popular by many, many authors from across the centuries, across the globe, and in the last few decades, especially by Ruskin Bond, India's national treasure. He is 90 years old. He's an Anglo-Indian author. He's highly decorated in terms of the awards that he's received. And he famously tells, he said this so many times, that when I run out of people, I invent ghosts. So now you know, Dr. Magan, that Mussoorie is a township which does tend to have some kind of a fantasy for its heritageized ghosts, as it were. So it's not unlikely if we find a ghost or two in the Savoy Hotel as well.
People hanker for stories. And there's no doubt why these writers feed them, what they're liking. Because at the end of the day, it suits their psychology, their cultural memory, to be able to get energized with a particular story rooted in their own culture. That's so nice. I mean, that could create in you some sort of pride. That's why when you talk about dark tourism, associating their place with it, I don't think it comes to some sort of negativity on their part, because in that way they're kind of known and they know exactly that there's no haunting that happened. Hauntology is just basically a kind of mechanism to prop themselves up into the global stage, into the cultural memory of the globe. That's the kind of thing that we are doing.
Well, that's marvelously put. So, to return to hauntology, the subject that we briefly spoke during the episode on Satyajit Ray. Now, hauntology, in this case, in the case of Mussoorie and dark tourism, by the way, the state of Uttarakhand, where Mussoorie is located, has itself toyed with dark tourism. So, what we are talking about is actually not gossip. We are talking, certainly in relation to gossip in an academic way, but we are not disseminating gossip. We are actually rationalizing how these things work. And like you've very rightly put, the hauntological element of Mussoorie stories and the Savoy Hotel story is just one of them. So that hauntological series, as it were, is rather a will to be recognized as an independent, distinct, beautiful, township and culture. So with that backdrop, do you think we have enough background material to now plunge into the story?
I think so. We have enough. Thinking about a place, a beautiful milieu, as beautiful as Mussoorie, I don't think we are given a hard time moving ourselves forward, because everything has been very rich, as you described, every detail. So let's plunge into it right away.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story, which I think a lot of it has been covered in reportage in the last 5 or 10 or 15 odd years. And Ruskin Bond has to be thanked for it, because he wrote a book called In a Crystal Ball, a Mussoorie Mystery, published in 2007. But he has been writing about certain aspects of this story for several decades. So he has indeed popularized it in the world of fiction. But what I am going to tell you is no fiction at all, Dr. Magan. I'm going to tell you the facts. Ruskin Bond has joined several of these facts and has given a convincing narrative, and that has sort of led the world to no longer be able to distinguish between fiction and history. And as I journey through the story, Dr. Magan, I will be stopping, I'll be pausing and sort of inquiring, if you don't mind, if you're able to process, because this is a very, very complex story. And the objectives of the story will be threefold. I'm going to tell you the story or the facts as they unfolded in history. My second objective would be to establish how it is likely that some people may have thought that the Savoy Hotel is haunted thanks to some murder that happened in that hotel 110, 12, 15 years ago. And my third and final and most important objective would be to debunk all that mythology, but to tell you something which is potentially even more interesting, because truth is interesting in its own right. So with those three objectives, I'd like to start. And I hope you would allow me to pause and sort of ask you if you are, as an independent observer from the Philippines, are able to process this complex tale.
No problem. I love the paradigm, and moving forward, we can parse everything the way you want it, and this is interesting.
So here it begins. The Savoy Hotel was built around 1902 by an Irish barrister. And the Savoy has these green spires, which over the century have become the symbol of its resilience and its phoenix like resurrectionary potential, because Savoy has been burned down in the very first decade of its establishment by thunderstorms, and it was rebuilt. There is this, popular notion among those who know the hotel that there's a curse attached to it, like the curse of the Hound of the Baskervilles, as it were, because 1902 is also the year that the Hound of the Baskervilles was published. So that might be coincidental, but these are colonial times, and the colonials, and particularly when seen through post-colonial lenses, the colonials seem to have lots of anxieties. So those anxieties then transplant or morph themselves as ghost stories and curse stories and stories of legends. So Savoy, even at its inception, began getting entangled in multiple legends. In 1910, we have one of our key characters, Eva Mount Stephens, who joins the employ of one Mrs. Melner in Darbhanga in the Bengal presidency. Darbhanga today is in Bihar, but back then it was in the Bengal presidency. And Mrs. Melner is important because it is through her testimony that we get to know that Miss Eva Mount Stephens was a crystal gazer. She was deeply interested in the supernatural stuff and all the occult matters. Now, by 1910, she was already friends with one Miss Frances Garnett Orme. Now, I'm going to spell her name for a specific reason, which I'll tell you later on. Frances Garnett Orme. Miss Frances Garnett Orme is or was a 49-year-old spinster who was once in love with a British Army soldier from the United Provinces who died. So she was lovelorn and wouldn't marry. But Eva Mount Stephens apparently had told Mrs. Melner around the October or November of 1910 that Miss Frances Garnett Orme was to go back to England. Now, this much was true. But after she would go to England, she would probably get married to an evil doctor who's after her wealth. And Eva Mount Stephens also predicted that within a year, Frances Garnett Orme was going to commit suicide. Now, surprise, surprise. In the subsequent months, Eva Mount Stephens manages to lose the job of a governess at her employeresses, that is Mrs. Melner, because Mrs. Melner is not on board with Eva Mount Stephens' occult logic, supernaturalist logic. So Eva Mount Stephens is not well liked by her employers. But she continues to be a very loyal friend to Frances Garnett Orme. And now she starts living in Mussoorie. And in September of 1911, Miss Frances Garnett Orme is found dead in her room on a day that Eva Mount Stephens was not there in Mussoorie. She was visiting Lucknow. It is suspected that Frances Garnett Orme was murdered. It is suspected that it was no suicide and some poison had been administered to her bottle of sodium bicarbonate, and that poison may have been cyanide or strychnine. I will skip a few dots here in this journey, and I will enter the next dot or the next episode that is unfolding in Britain, or is supposed to have unfolded in Britain. But as of now, Dr. Magan, have I reported the facts of the case convincingly and comprehensively to you so far?
Yes. And very importantly, you shared how this character, Eva, was plunged into a miserable situation. Okay, we know exactly in movies, right? The person is always the closest one to the person who died, would have been given this punishment of being labeled as the murderer, the criminal, whatever they say. Well, that's always the case, right? So we are very interested to know more about the trajectory of the life of Eva in this story.
Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for reinforcing that. Yes, Eva Mount Stephens, in our view, in the view of that story, in the manner that I have reported it so far, is already a suspect because her former employers doesn't like her. She's an occultist. The British regime does not have too much tolerance for these matters. Indian milieu, you might argue that, oh, there's all this hocus pocus. Indians are a very complex society. While that is true, a lot of people, even in Indian society, I should add, perhaps especially in Indian society, also do not subscribe to supernaturalist explanations around this time. So there is a camaraderie between the elite colonial society and the Mussourie's, native Indian residents who seem to be blaming Eva Mount Stephens. The police have framed charges, and Eva Mount Stephens, by the end of 1911, is the prime suspect of this quote-unquote murder, and she's arrested. I'll move a few years ahead. In 1920, Dame Agatha Christie's first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, is published. The key plot of this story, sorry for the spoiler, but it revolves around Emily Inglethorpe, who dies mysteriously in very similar political, social, cultural, most importantly, economic circumstances as Frances Garnett Orme died. Emily Inglethorpe is about to marry someone, but her estate has multiple suitors. Many people want to stake claims to her estate, and at this key critical juncture, she's found dead, and it is murder by poisoning. A bottle of potassium bromide had been tampered with. Crystals of strychnine sulfate were added to it so that potassium and strychnine would combine. Strychnine is an alkali, so potassium and strychnine would come together. They would create a compound, and those crystals would be found as the precipitate in the bottle. So when you finished consuming the medicine, whatever little remains, the last vestige of that medicine is actually poison, and that is what kills Emily Inglethorpe. I will not go into the details of the novel, except one sentence. Hercule Poirot, who was introduced to the world in this novel, tells Hastings that some years ago, some decades ago, a woman in England was known to die in very similar circumstances. And these are not words that came from the mind of Agatha Christie, but words that she had read in a book called The Practice of Pharmacy, written by Joseph Price Remington in 1886. This is critical evidence that I am laying before you, Dr. Magan, because this suggests to us that Agatha Christie, a writer of fiction, definitely read a lot, and a lot on toxicology, as we have also discussed in the Arthur Conan Doyle episode. Now, we think that authors of fiction try and invent and imagine everything from the factory of the mind palace, as it were. But that's not entirely true, because naturally, when these people are so well versed with language, culture, science, and so on, then they must also be very well read. So this gives us critical evidence that our authoress here was a well-versed person, and especially in toxicology, which she learned as a nurse while serving during the First World War at a war hospital in Torquay. So she was trained in medicine. She had knowledge of toxicology, and she had knowledge of the literature on toxicology. Now, what I have established so far, Dr. Magan, now you can tell me if you are not convinced or if you are, that Agatha Christie had a deeply imaginative mind, but she was also putting to good use the literature, the scientific literature, especially that was in circulation at that time, especially Joseph Price Remington's book, and therefore it is not unlikely that she might have formed long distance but intellectual coalitions with her predecessor, Arthur Conan Doyle.
There's no doubt. They have the literary circle. I could recall Virginia Woolf, right, being in the Bloomsbury group, and they just talked about these things consistently. They talked about their techniques and their inspirations. Why not? Agatha could be brushing elbows with Conan Doyle at some point, and imagining perhaps they were talking in a shop, drinking a cup of hot chocolate, and sharing a thing or two about this mystery in Hotel Savoy, and perhaps. Conan Doyle was just giving her the idea, and it was Agatha who really, really amplified it. And using her own experience as a nurse, for example, and drawing a lot from these schema elements, I thought that she perfected it. And another writer whom I knew so well, who's kind of into using her own experience, Barbara Michaels, when she wrote about a very authentic Egyptian narrative, she really went to Egypt and discovered everything there, excavated every sort of information that she could use in the novel. So long story short, they wouldn't be writing any novel if there's no grounding. They really have to dig and dig, and that's how a good writer should be. Trying to really create this impression that there's the blurring of line between, history and fiction, just to create a world for us to escape to. Because at the end of the day, that's the goal of storytelling.
Exactly, well put. But allow me to add that the explanation that you have given, the imaginative gossamer that you have woven, is actually very fragile, delicate, believable. That is not how it may have happened, and because I do not have evidence for it, I'm not going to claim it. At least, however, what we can do is to suggest that this is not entirely unlikely. This is not boisterous. This is very much within the purview of possibilities, because now when we come from both sides, from 1920 and from 1911, at least we see that there are possibilities how this communication between a murder plot in Mussoorie could have happened, with respect to Agatha Christie's mysterious affair at Styles. There are links being given. A historian, Peter Costello, writes in his book Conan Doyle Detective, published in 1991, that apparently Rudyard Kipling, who was a Nobel laureate by 1911, came to know about this happenstance that unfolded in Mussoorie, and that is not unlikely because Kipling was a long-time resident of Simla, and almost everything of any interest that happened in India, would have been known to Kipling by the end of the 19th century. Later on, he retired to England. He had his informants back in India, so now being more famous and sought after, surely it wouldn't have been very difficult for him to get the facts. Arthur Conan Doyle, who we have already described as somebody who never set foot on India, but he was deeply interested in Indian matters. Again, it is not inconceivable that Kipling shared the details, or might have shared the details of this case with Arthur Conan Doyle, because 1911, he's at the peak of his, murder mystery fiction writing career. So why not? Whether or not he would have taken it as a plot is a different story altogether. Naturally, he did not. But while it is conceivable that Kipling may have heard it from somebody in India and may have passed it to Doyle, both were Freemasons. Peter Costello even describes a speculative scene where they might have met in a Freemason lodge, and Kipling handed over the details, apparently. I have my skepticism about the exact time and place, but there is another link between Kipling, Doyle on the one hand, and Agatha Christie on the other, and that is Eden Philpotts, who was actually born in Rajasthan in Mount Abu, and he was also connected to Kipling. Interesting. So Eden Philpotts was the literary agent to whom Agatha Christie had submitted her initial manuscripts, and he may have been the missing link between Doyle Kipling or Kipling and Agatha Christie. So far, what we have is some kind of evidence that all this ontological business about the murder plot feeding into Agatha Christie's mysterious affair at Styles plot is within the realm of conceivability. But what happens afterwards is more interesting. So far, Dr. Magan, do we have all the facts in order? Have I been able to rate them in a comprehensive way to you?
Perfectly. These dots really have come full circle, in the context of the Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie supposed interaction. And as you said, this literary agent, as we say, is another bridge, right? Could have been giving them so many information about this very, very rich landscape through which they could figure their imaginative world. I'm very excited to see what is to be unfolded next, knowing that we have firmly excavated this information that we need so much to better understand the next few things.
So here comes the meat of my archival research. And now let me also add that Mussoorie is very, very close to my heart. So whatever I will say about Mussoorie, I may be entirely accidentally wrong, God forbid. It may have been totally unforeseen, entirely inadvertent, but knowingly, I would never ever misreport anything about Mussoorie. Mussoorie was actually the field of my doctoral dissertation. So I researched on the hill stations, I researched on colonial architecture, and I researched on these legends. And my research is still not complete because it's an ever unfolding narrative. So I will certainly not in any way try and distort. But the distortion that's happening in the current reportage is very heartbreaking for me. So it's also on a very personal level that I feel hurt, and I also feel hurt intellectually. What unfolds after 1911 is as follows. Eva Mount Stephens is taken a prisoner. Charges are framed against her. But by January and February, it is becoming amply clear that other than the gossip that we hear from Mussoorie, residents, colonials, sahibs, peasants, Indians, British, other than all that, other than a good story, there is no evidence to suggest that Eva Mount Stephens had anything to do with the murder, even remotely. Yes, she predicted it. Yes, her employers does not like her. But Frances Garnett Orme herself was a practitioner of seances. That is why these two women connected. It was not Eva Mount Stephens who was brainwashing Frances Garnett Orme. It could well have been the other way around, but actually not. They were connected on some wavelength. And because Frances Garnett Orme had named Eva Mount Stephens the executor of her will, that is why so many suspicions fell on Eva Mount Stephens. This story has been narrated over the ages with some help from Ruskin Bond, who again I must reinforce, he's an author of fiction, he's a teller of stories, he's a beautiful soul, he's a beautiful mind. So he has done his job well, and he has convinced a lot of people of a fictional world. And his stories are so impactful that people have very often not only resonated with those stories, but have started believing and living in those worlds, actually. But that does not give people like me, you, us, Dr. Magran, reporters, academic scholars to misreport the facts. I mean, we can talk about ontology in a literary sense, in a philosophical sense, in the manner that Jacques Derrida deployed that notion. But when we start toying with the facts, we create disrepute for people who may not be living anymore, but surely Eva Mount Stephens has her descendants somewhere. The first evidence that I'm going to point out to you, Dr. Magran, is the way Eva Mount Stephens is spelled in all these recent reports that until today claim that she was the murderer. They say, apparently, the reporters say, that this case was written about from India to England. That is not an outrageous claim, because whatever used to happen in India was widely reported. India was amazingly well represented in the British consciousness throughout the 19th century, especially afterwards. But the fact that they have not even read a single report of the death, the murder, the case, the trial is evident in the fact that they spell Eva Mount Stephens as spelling a name wrong. And that is why I had spelled Frances Garnett Orme to you, Dr. Magran, but I had not spelled Eva Mount Stephens. Now, would you like to know how her name is spelled?
I would want to know that. But before you give me the answer, I just want to say to you something very important, that having her name wrongly spelled in these papers, we are seeing here Eurocentrism versus Orientalism. There's always that conflict, and how one assignment of name is tarnished because of a higher or super highly imposed ideology that, you know, if you're coming from this side of the world, I mean, you're subject to scrutiny and everything. If you're telling the world tonight that, this person who died is practicing the same thing that Eva had been doing in her life, soothsaying, doing the supernatural stuff. Perhaps the white would never be able to really fathom why she's doing this when she has the profession. It's a question of what she would want to do in life, which could never be accepted by the general white population during this time when India was basically under the charge of Britain. So that's the reason why you are targeting these people who wrongly represent Eva Mount Stephens. And you're right, it's high time to really tell them what really happened. And your archival support to that account has been very, very massive, Professor Chatterjee.
It's not only that, and I completely wholeheartedly endorse what you're saying. It's not merely the politics of colonial ideology of not liking superstitions. I mean, go back to the Hound of the Baskervilles. What does Sherlock Holmes say? That the case could have been caused by supernatural agents or some power, but they will leave naturalist manifestations. Now, this is a very beautiful ideology that I personally also subscribe to. I very much subscribe to, and I think whether it's a dualist religious practice or a non-dualist religious practice, whether you have a god up there and a human being down here, or whether you do not discriminate between the two entities, I think it's an ideology compatible with both positions, both epistemologies. So to kind of tarnish Eva Mount Stephens because of something that even Frances Garnett Orme was habitual towards, I think is naturally it is unethical. And then the way Eva Mount Stephens has been remembered, her name is spelled in these present day 21st century reports as EVA MOUNT STEPHENS, whereas that was not the spelling of her name. Because if you use that name, that spelling, to go to the archives, you will find nothing in relation to Mussoorie. Rather, her name is spelled as EVA MOUNCE STEPHENS. So now that I have shared this openly, I hope people who listen to our podcast Google or search with that name, go to the archives, and they'll be able to tell you that the archives are actually not full as these reporters claim, but the archives contain some information. I'm not sure if everybody would be able to track it, but the information that the archives tell us is that Eva Mount Stephens was acquitted because of lack of evidence. And for years until the 21st century, even today, people consider that hotel, Savoy Hotel, haunted because apparently the ghost of Frances Garnett Orme still roams about the property, the establishment, its gardens. It's got a wonderful, architecture and huge meadows. And the whole basis of this story is that a spirit haunts the establishment looking for her killer, but she was never killed. Eva Mount Stephens did not kill Frances Garnett Orme, and by that logic, the Savoy Hotel is not haunted. It is haunted, within quotes, in a literary way, in a philosophical way, in a poetical way, metaphorical way, by the ghosts of the past, by the memories. But it is not haunted by this ghost of Frances Garnett Orme, because she was not killed. The courts did not find any evidence, and Eva Mount Stephens was set free. And this was a case framed against her because of jealousy, because she had been named the executor of the will. Now, this is very interesting. You brought up the ideology, social resistance against superstition. Well, I can see that I do not subscribe to superstition or supernaturalist explanations, but not subscribing is one thing. Criminalizing is something very different. You have your own worldview, you have your own epistemology, but the other is not a criminal. The other may not be right in your worldview. In the 19th century, occultism became so integral to even Western values. I say even, but it was primarily Western values because in England in the 19th century, occultism became an integral part of certain kinds of feminist identity because women were protesting against, this complete censorship of them, of their persons in all kinds of religious discourses. So the mainstream religious discourse, which was Trinitarian or Orthodox, maybe in their perception was not including enough of them. So table rapping, occult discourses, seances, they sort of started gaining ground. Once again, I do not subscribe to it, but I find Helena Blavatsky a beautiful scholar. She was hysterical. She was, passionate. She was even mad or fraudulent, as some people have suggested. Arthur Conan Doyle sort of became disillusioned with Helena Blavatsky, but I consider her a remarkable scholar. So Eva Mount Stephens and Frances Garnett Orme were representations of this scholarly attitude, and for that they were criminalized. And I hope people, when they hear this episode, they are able to see Savoy in the right light. And once again, to its owners, let me say that we are not saying your hotel is haunted. We're actually doing you a favor by debunking the mythology surrounding your hotel, and we are asking our viewers to please visit the hotel and see its merit for what it stands.
Hearing these things, I myself am very interested to actually go there, because you told me a couple of times this is never haunted at all. In the interest of these owners, I thought that the best phrase we can give them is that your hotel is creatively haunted. And to be British with this, we can say creatively haunted, right? As we often say it. It's beautiful, like you said, when this particular establishment is being magnetized to this concept of dark tourism, because you shared how this could, in a way, develop the locale and could make a sort of feeling in these natives, or in these people living in Mussoorie, that at one point their place had been the subject of a super beautifully written piece. And we're not just talking about Agatha here, but Conan Doyle and many people who probably got inspiration from this incident in Hotel Savoy. As you spoke of this feministic representation, by the way, we could channelize that to the Southeast Asian drama as well, creating this invigorating emotion of the Southeast Asian sort of embodiment of the same clamor for such awareness of who these women are in this part of the world. So it's not something very isolated, the idea that women would, take charge of themselves and would go to the extent of creating in themselves a new identity. Like in the Philippines, the Babaylan, they're doing the shamanistic practices. And when the Spanish colonizers came, they had to really do everything they could to protect themselves and their families and their children and their children's children. So in that light, they're seen as very monstrous beings and very hard to decipher individuals. But time and again, they've proven that they're just simply asserting their agency, ensuring that they could survive as well. It's about survival. And for Eva, I'm so happy to hear that she was not imprisoned. And after a year, she got the taste of liberty, because she really never did it. And I believed in you, that this person who died was more of a spirit who wanted to really end herself. There's this love trope involved in the story. No one can really discredit that. It's such a huge thing in life, allowing herself to be dragged by it. That's really sad. And tonight, it's a mixture of sadness and happiness, because there's this new thing you have uncovered and discovered for all people to know, that this hotel is never ever haunted. So anyone can just go there any time of the day.
And this is my very staunch feminist side speaking. I don't bring it out most of the times, but if Eva's name could be cleared from this murder mystery, if her stigma could be removed, it would do us, it would do all of us, but certainly me, a great world of good. Because as you have rightly said, and I resonate with each and every word, this monsterization, because of a perceived ideology that is perceptibly or seemingly different than yours. Maybe you're a colonial doing it to a non-colonial, and sometimes you're a colonial doing it to a fellow colonial, and sometimes you're a non-colonial doing it to a colonial in the name of anti-coloniality. I mean, there are so many combinations that's possible, but essentially it's one dominating over the other, because you cannot find faults in the other things. So you find fault in the irrational, that which you cannot defend rationally. So if Eva and Frances Garnett Orme were quote unquote irrational people in their seances and so on, imprisoning Eva Mount Stephens on no evidence whatsoever. How rational is that? So what does that make of you? But it also reminds me of the research that you are doing, Dr. Magan. Now, we haven't shared that with our viewers, but we have some very uh, hot research coming out of Philippines, and which talks about the Ramayana tradition and how
Of
it went to the
course.
Philippines and what ramifications it has in the present. But we have to wait for that. So I'm really excited for that to unfold.
I'm very excited too. And you using the word hot makes me feel indeed it's very hot because once it comes out, it would surely resonate with so many ideas to the rest of the archipelago and assemblage, right, of islands. Like South Asia, Southeast Asia too has its fair share of these ideas that the West can never fathom. That's why they call it the irrational and, labeling the supposed rational irrational simply because there's this uniqueness, there's peculiarity, and more than that, there's this element of beauty that cannot be reduced to the linguistic structures that are available in the dictionary. Through proper archiving and proper research, things
And
could be ironed
integrity.
out
I think
perfectly.
that is most important. We need to maintain integrity and not just this mad hunger for populism.
That's the reason why this podcast is very important because we're shedding light on these things very much misunderstood in the past few years. Can you imagine? It's a 1912 incident and we are bringing it to 2024. All I can say is we're doing these people a favor, these Gen Z people a favor, because I know that they no longer care about these things. They care about something else. And for us to be giving them something from history that is really, really backed up by a lot of things coming from you, of course, it's a beautiful treat. And they can start digging things from there, especially when you spell out the name of Eva very, very efficiently. I thought that they couldn't help it, but also do the archiving themselves.
And
And for
just
sure,
to add, uh, sorry for the interruption, Dr. Magan. I do
it's fun.
apologize, but I think I missed a critical detail. Since you bring up Gen Z and since you bring up this bridge between the past and the present, you would not be able to guess, Dr. Magan, how far the news of Eva Mount Stephens and Frances Garnett Orme had spread. One of the newspapers where I found some more details, which I already partly knew about the whole murder plot or suicide thing that unfolded in the Savoy, was in a newspaper in Canada, and it is still published. I'm not naming the newspaper because I don't want people to hurriedly read it up or find it, and but it's still published from Ontario. I'm not naming it because people will immediately associate another stigma with the name of the newspaper. But India was well represented. Southeast Asia was well represented in the Western horizon. We need to go out there, do the work, and that is what you and I are doing here in Bilateral.
Exactly. Hopefully, there's a descendant of Eva watching tonight because, like you said, Eva died a long time ago, but her relatives and whoever knew Eva, for example, would like the idea that she's vindicated and that at some point the name, so much tarnished, could be given a new image, a new form, and that's for posterity's sake. That's the beauty of if you do research well. And this is what's happening to the world today, that research is shunned for the most part because fiction is given more importance. So for the viewers tonight of Bilateral View, it's a wake-up call that you have to love research and you have to love fiction as well, but you have to strike a balance between the two. It's beautiful to have these two on the side, given premium all the time, not one over the other. No, that can't happen. Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. It's a really, really great ride, and your storytelling is marvelous. Indeed, it's like I'm in Mussoorie, and I'm picturing I'm at the lobby of Hotel Savoy as well. And I'm not haunted. As you said, it's never haunted at all. So, yeah, it's a beautiful place. I can imagine it. And tonight, it's more beautiful if we encourage our viewers to do one thing, and I thought that you could do the honor of saying it.
Before that, let me take you to the Savoy once again, for the sake
Okay.
of its modern day proprietors, for the sake of all these legends, for the sake of all these ghosts who almost were, but are actually not there, for the sake of this great legacy of storytelling that Mussoorie still preserves, from transept to transept, from corridor to corridor, from lobby to lobby, I see, I hear the presence of apparitions of the past, trailing my feet, calling after me. I'm paraphrasing here from one of Mussourie's authors, Ganesh Saili. I've met him in person. He's a wonderful person, and he's a professor. He's still very much around, alive, kicking, writing wonderfully well. And there are so many others who live in Mussoorie and have kept alive the literary tradition. Please visit Hotel Savoy. Please visit Mussoorie. Please visit the place where I spend so much of my time, if not physically, mentally. It is one of my second homes. I have infamously said that maybe in the previous birth or in some other birth yet to come, I was born in Mussoorie, and I invite all of you to please stay tuned for all the episodes that are unfolding in Bilateral View. Dr. Rodora Magan here, and I, Arup K. Chatterjee, we've been working certainly very hard, but we've been working with a great deal of honesty. And our commitment to scholarship, our commitment to try and unearth the best possible scholarly realization within our souls, that is what we are trying to get across to you. We are not here to lecture to you. These are not sermons. We are trying to sit with you. We are trying to tell you stories from across cultures, trying to share our humble analyses with you with total integrity. Dr. Magan, I would love for you to canvas for our channel, Bilateral View, please, if you would.
All right, it's like I gave the ball to you and you're giving back the ball to me. All right, no problem. Our dear viewers, please, if you found value in this podcast, do like and share. Don't forget to comment as well. We'll love every time you comment on the topic. Creating a whole new world for this generation, commenting intellectually. That's so beautiful, Professor Chatterjee.
Thank you so much. And it's a very happy, hopeful, and I would say destigmatized, non haunted, or dehauntified good night and namaste to all of you.
Daghan kaayong salamat. Thank you very much. See you next time.